Hi there, my name is Dimitri, and I'm here to take you on a journey through the implementation of design patterns using the C# programming language and the .NET framework. So before we get started talking about the structure of the course, I want to talk a bit about myself. So my name is Dimitri. Here is a rather official looking picture of me. I work in an area called Quant Finance, which is an interesting blend of math, finance, and computing, including some really cool applications of high performance computing. I am a frequent conference speaker, a blogger, a podcaster, and generally involved in the developer community as well. I've been a Microsoft MVP for a very long time now, focusing primarily on the C# programming language, and this is a course on design patterns with C# and .NET. So what are design patterns exactly? Well, put simply, design patterns are common architectural approaches that have been observed in software engineering practices, and these common approaches are expressed in the form of so-called design patterns. Now, a pattern is nothing more than a description of the approach, how it is expressed in a programming language, and what it's actually used for. Now, the notion of design patterns was, of course, popularized in 1994 by the immortal Gang of Four book, and this book effectively spun off an entire industry devoted to expressing design patterns in the various settings. Now, the original book was written using Smalltalk and C++, and these languages are not exactly alive and kicking. Smalltalk is almost dead, and C++, even though it's continually evolving, doesn't offer the same amount of flexibility as .NET. So we are very lucky in a way, and some of the patterns that have been expressed in this book were actually incorporated right into the C# programming language. But essentially, the notion of design patterns has been translated to just about every object-oriented programming language that's out there. So you'll find books on design patterns in C#, Java, Ruby, and lots of other languages, even languages which are not properly object-oriented, like JavaScript, for example. The reason why this course you're watching right now exists is the fact that we're living in an object-oriented paradigm, and the design patterns in the object-oriented paradigm have become universally relevant. So in other words, the patterns have not become outdated or obsolete, and they are unlikely to go out of fashion anytime soon. And furthermore, what happened is some programming languages, and C# is one such language, they actually made design patterns part of the language, making the use of certain patterns a lot easier by baking them right into the syntax of the language. And in addition, some of the design patterns are now available as libraries. So you can download their library, and that library actually gives you a design pattern implementation by itself. And of course, what you're going to see as you program in the real world is you're going to see yourself implementing design patterns in your own code, even if you don't realize it. So you're going to be building things, and then later on you might realize, aha, this is actually a design pattern that I've seen in this particular course. So let's talk about the course. What is the structure of the course? So we're going to begin by discussing the solid design principles, and these are design principles of object-oriented design that we're going to be referring to in some of the discussions of the design patterns themselves. And after we talk about the solid design principles, we're going to jump and actually discuss the different design patterns. So we'll go through the typical gamma categorization as it's known. So we'll go through creational patterns, structural patterns, and behavioral patterns as well. Now, if you're wondering what exactly are the patterns, well, it's a standard approach. So it's a standard set of patterns taken from the original Gang of Four book. So we're going to look at all the creational patterns. And the only thing I've changed here is I've kind of grouped together the abstract factory and factory method patterns inside a single section of the course called factories, because it seems to make more sense that way. Then we're going to look at structural patterns. Once again, no changes to the Gang of Four books, standard list of patterns. And then we're going to look at behavioral patterns, and this is a pretty standard list. The only thing that I've added here is the null object pattern, which is a known pattern, a known behavioral pattern that is relevant today, and so we're going to incorporate this as part of the overall list. So the organization of this course goes as follows. The course is 100% practical. So I'm going to be basically typing in Visual Studio and explaining the scenarios, and most of the demos, like 99% of the demos, are single file C# files. So what this means is you can download the file and you can run it in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Writer or any kind of IDE that you want. I've also added end of section coding exercises, and typically those exercises relate to design patterns, and most of them are of the implement this pattern variety. So I give you a scenario and I ask you to implement this pattern. Now, because I've been programming for a very long time, what you're going to see in this course is you're going to see very heavy use of ReSharper. So I'm going to be using ReSharper to generate things all over the place. There's also going to be liberal use of public fields. This is not a coding recommendation. I'm simply trying to save time in terms of explaining certain concepts, because strictly speaking, you have to think about encapsulation. You have to think about how to best expose your data. But in certain cases, I'm going to be cutting corners by using public fields. You're also going to see me in some of the examples use dependency injection. I'm going to be using AutoFac. I have a separate course on AutoFac if you're interested, but I'm going to be using it like it's normal, because it is normal. It's normal to use dependency injection. And indeed, one of the key points about this course is that instead of ignoring the existence of this concept of dependency injection, we're going to talk about how it interacts with the different design patterns. And finally, you're going to see lots of use of third-party NuGet packages. So if I need something like, for example, if I need dynamic proxy, I'm just going to go onto the NuGet store and I'm going to download the appropriate package. So once again, this is a very normal practice for any .NET developer. So let's talk about some of the prerequisites for this course. Obviously, you have to have a good understanding of C#, and generally you have to have an understanding of object-oriented programming principles, because design patterns are object-oriented patterns. If you wanted monads, those are the functional patterns, that would be a different course, but this course is on object-oriented constructs. Now, the kind of topics that are going to be mentioned in the course, in addition to just general C#, are the following, and I'm not going to focus on them, and their knowledge is not critical, by the way. So at some point, I will mention sequence processing, so things like LINQ or reactive extensions. We are going to talk about concurrency concerns or multi-threading concerns, and in this case, I might mention the task parallel library. In addition, we're going to mention dependency injection in many places, because it's always interesting to find out how the design pattern behaves if you actually use it in the context of a dependency injection container. So if you're ready to jump in and learn about design patterns, then let's go, and I will see you on the other side.